I'm Helene Krauthamer. I teach English. I'm also the English BA program coordinator. I just, kind of a disclaimer here. I'm not an expert in anything I'm about to tell you. I am a faculty member just using rubrics and just using this new tool called EAC Analysis. Okay, so, but I want to share with you in this session how I develop rubrics, how I've used rubric analysis, and Dr. Ruth Newberry, who's also here. Would you like to introduce yourself, Ruth?
Sure. Welcome, everybody. Glad to see you. So I am the anthology consultant that is working with UDC, a variety of people and speech language pathology. We've started some conversations there on how to use this tool, EAC Assessment Analytics, with your courses. So I've been involved in several conversations. Happy to be here to listen and learn from Helene and offer advice towards the end on how you can begin to use this tool that's readily available to help gather information on student learning. So thank you.
Okay, so thank you. So let's move along here. I think I can move along here. Hold on. Yes, good. Slides moving. Okay. So what I hope we'll do in this session is we'll review the benefit of using rubrics over holistic grades, the elements of a rubric, criterion values, and how to create a rubric in Blackboard Ultra. I actually did have a previous webinar that was exclusively about how to create a rubric. So there's a YouTube video on that one, and I can share that with you if you like. So this session is actually more of a review of that. But I also put into this PowerPoint examples of rubrics for writing and discussions and postings and discussion postings and presentations. So you'll see 3 examples of rubrics that I've actually used. Then we're going to get into the really fancy part of this, the EAC visual data analysis, because you can, once you've got these rubrics in place, you can do this incredible rubric analysis. But the key part of this is to think about how can we use the results of that analysis to improve the rubric itself, as well as our classes and the learning as it's actually going on. Are there any other learning outcomes you were hoping you would get out of this session? Asia and Tony and William, perhaps? Does it seem like, okay, so let's keep moving. All right, so when you're developing a rubric, you're really asking these 5 basic questions. What are the criteria? What are the values? How you can describe these values? How you're going to measure these values? And then the key one is, and then what are you using the rubrics for? These are big questions. They're not easy questions to answer, and often these questions are answered not as an individual, but as a collective. Like, all the teachers in a particular program will look at what are the criteria and values descriptions, values and rubrics. So it's a process. It's not just a sit down and do it thing. So this is, again, I said, this is a review because I've given a webinar once before and it's available. But the key question you should be asking if you're just starting this is, what's the advantage of a rubric over a holistic grade? A holistic grade is like, I'm giving an A, a B, a C, a D. And that's, say when a student gets a paper back and all they see is an A, well, that's, they probably will just go off on that. But what if they see it's just a C? And what do they do with that? So the idea of a rubric is you break down what you mean by that C into these elements, which are the criteria and the values. And the amazing thing about Blackboard is that you can create these rubrics right in Blackboard and they will be there forever. I'll show you what I mean when you see my collection of rubrics over the years. So here's a little exercise, which I think we can do. Like, just think about these questions, or even jot it down or write it down or something. When we no, I'm a writing, I teach writing mostly, but so this should be on everybody's minds anyway. What do we mean by good writing? How do we measure good writing? So just right now, just, shout out if you like. I do encourage you to shout out. You can unmute yourself or put in the chat area. Like, what are you looking for in good writing? Anyone want to comment? Shout out. Asia, go ahead. I see you've unmuted yourself. Go ahead.
Yes, how well the criteria is met for the assignment.
Okay, that's good. Anybody else want to shout out something?
I would say, is the content specific to what's being asked, which is similar to what Asia just said, but also, is it logical and organized?
Very good. Yeah, I would love to stick in the organization in this. Any other qualities?
Yeah, and I think this is connected, and that is, does it meet certain technical specifications? Because we teach more script writing, or like writing for news and documentary, and like you can have the best of writing, but if it's not in the format that can be used to generate a production, that's not good. So it's like it's not like technical writing, like the class technical writing, but it's that combination of the technical side of writing with the creative side of writing when it has to meet certain specifications.
Very good. So you've really captured, you'll see soon, my example of good writing, the rubric for that. What about do you all use discussion boards in your classes? You all use discussion boards? Yeah. So do you have a rubric for your discussion boards, or do you just give them, you've done it, you get 5 points? That would be a holistic grade. You've done it, you get 5 points. But if you break it down, what is it that you're looking for that would give them the 5 or whatever points you're awarding to it?
You know what? Discussion boards are probably the place where we use rubrics the most.
Oh, good.
Like any place where output could be very subjective, that is where we find we need to use rubrics the most. So like on one side, it's like, like poetry or like a visual essay, really subjective on that side. And on the other side, your input into a discussion, because discussion boards are a bit more conversational in their written English. So like those are the two places where we use rubrics the most.
And so, yeah, and you'll see my discussion board rubric, and I'd really appreciate some of your commentary on, how it compares to your discussion board rubric. And now presentations. I'm sure in oral communication, you're doing presentations all the time. So what are those qualities of a good presentation? I really actually want to know. Asia or Tony, you have any?
It's a lot. Delivery will be one. Also the criteria, oral citations, the presence of that, the actual research that they're doing, introductory conclusions. Some people don't know how to, it just, okay, my speech is over. So the ability to introduce and close out a speech as well.
Yeah, good.
I think for us too, because of the field I work in, engaging the audience and being able to answer questions or reflect on what audience or participants have to ask as you do your presentation or at the end.
Good. These are good. You can really help me on my presentation rubric. I'll show you why. Okay. So that's essentially what you're trying to do, just kind of come up with those criteria. Once you have those criteria, though, the job's not done, because you've got to think about the things like how are you going to measure it? What's the value? Like it becomes a numeric thing. And then when you have a value, how do you describe that to the students? Because this becomes a teaching tool. It's not just a measuring tool. It's a teaching tool so that the students can see what we mean by each of these criteria. And then the measure is giving it a number, so that you'll see there's a lot of numbers in this. So let me move along. Any questions so far? As you know, this is pretty interactive itself, so feel free to chime in or chat or raise your hand, whatever, interrupt at all. So what do you do with your results? The reason you're seeing this little kid, he's not, he or she, they are not related to me, but in my prior webinar, I used chocolate as what we were trying to come up with values for, and I just love this picture. So, but the real question is, what are you going to do once you have your rubric? How are you going to use it? All right, now I know this is one of those slides that it's good if you're sitting in front of a computer, because otherwise you would never ever be able to read this in a projection room. And in fact, in one of my rubrics for PowerPoints, it's don't have a slide like this with so much information on it that you can't see it. But knowing that you guys would be looking at it on a screen, you could see what it's all about. So these are the actual steps, 14 of them, to how to create a rubric in Blackboard. It's not that hard. It looks hard when you look at this, but this will be recorded and I can share the steps with you, like as a piece of, a Word document if you need to see it. But every course in Blackboard gives you the option of creating a rubric, which is you go into your course, you click on the content tab, you click on the little plus thing, you click on create item, you click on assignment, test discussion. It's only in assignments, so that's the only place you'd find it. And there was an older system where we went directly into tools, but now it's right in every assignment or test or discussion area. And then you click on grade category, and then you click on additional tools. I'm just reading through this list. You add a grading rubric, you create the new rubric, but then you're going to get to the point where you have to do what we were just talking about. What are your criteria? What are your values? What is the description? What is your rubric type? And save. So this is complex, and it's not something, again, it's not something you sit down, you do it in an instant. It needs some thought and possibly discussion with the people around you. But you can always change it, and you can always modify it. You can always go back in and revise the language and the values and the criteria. The key thing to be thinking about with your criteria is it useful for you? What are you going to do with it? And what is the student going to do with it? So in my own personal essay rubric, my criteria are, and it kind of aligns with what you were all talking about with writing. I refer to it as the TODUM rubric, TODUM, for thesis, organization, development, and then usage and mechanics, which are two categories that mean grammar to me. And if you look, it's kind of hard to see this essay rubric. This is a different one, but this is an example of what the essay rubric would look like in Blackboard. And again, when you get into it, you'll see for yourselves. Again, the values are excellent, or you don't have to call it excellent. You could call it exceeds expectations or exemplary. You choose the words, and the words do help. For example, I'm looking at the values here and I'm seeing unsatisfactory and poor. And I'm thinking, how does a student see that? Is that the best way of referring to it or not? Because again, this is something students will see. And if they see it's poor, they may lose hope. I've always liked to use needs improvement, which sounds a little nicer, but or lacking, or however you want to word it. But you get the option of referring to it that way. The descriptions are where the language really comes in, and that's where you want to take a lot of time thinking about how to describe each value. Now, number 13 gets into some technical aspects of it. Do you want to do it as a percentage range, points, or points range? I go with points. I'll share with you mine. But the thing to remember is at the very end, don't forget to save it. Otherwise, it's like it never happened. That's happened to me, where you put in all this work and not hitting the save means like you go away and you log out, it's gone. So don't forget that last step of saving. I know you probably do have questions, but are there any questions I can answer right now for you about this? Okay. Again, at some point you can just kind of get it. And there are a lot of videos, I should point out, there are a lot of videos on how to do this. So now I'm going to share with you my own personal essay rubric, discussion board rubric, PowerPoint rubric, and I would love to hear your feedback on how, would a rubric like these work for you. And there's a note that the EAC analysis will give you a big analysis on any of these, except for the rubrics used in exam questions. Do any of you use exam questions? Because I don't. I don't. Okay, here we go.
A quick question, like rubrics for exam questions, obviously like short answer and essay questions, right? Like if it's a multiple choice, it's not so much a rubric as it is, it's B or C. Right. I didn't know. I actually didn't even know that there were rubrics built into exams, but I imagine they're going to be for, again, the more subjective stuff.
Yes.
Ruth, comment on that, please.
Yes. In the original Blackboard, you could build a rubric and attach it to any essay question or exam or short answer, mostly essay. In Ultra, that ability is coming. But because of the way these questions and that are created in Ultra, EAC doesn't actually pull it out and give you a nice rubric analysis, as we're going to see, but it will give you a distribution. It starts to say, here's how many were at the top 10%, mid%, like that. So more like a grade distribution. But that ability to add rubrics to essay questions is coming. It's just that it's difficult to get a nice rubric report out of it.
Thanks for that. And again, Ruth is the expert on the EAC part of this. I'm still a newcomer to it. So here we go. But I'm not a newcomer to rubrics. I've been using rubrics from the day one when I started teaching writing. And this is a sample essay rubric. It's not my actual TODUM rubric, which I use constantly. This is a rubric that we were using for the common assessment for the Foundations writing courses and, discovery writing classes in the general education program. So this is a rubric that we labored over quite a while. If you know Rebecca Graham from our assessment, she's the assessment coordinator. She worked with many of us to develop a rubric as in workshop format, where we sat in a room and we labored over the criteria and then the language and then the values, because we're using this rubric for the general education common assessments. Anyway, so let's just look at this one and we can talk about this a little bit. Again, everything's open to change. So, your feedback is actually very, very helpful. So the criteria, the discovery writing course I like to think of it as our research paper course. And why do I like to think of it that way? Because those are the learning objectives. The student learning outcomes are really what's behind all of these rubrics. SLOs is the way we refer to them. The SLOs are, again, determined when you're developing the course, as well as they should be linking to the university's learning outcomes, like what do we want our students to learn? So this is a process that should be like, going from what is the school, our university's student learning outcomes for all of our students, and then those filter down to the program areas, and those filter down to the courses, and those filter down to the assignments, the assessments that we give them, and those emerge in these rubrics, if you could visualize that. Therefore, we have use of sources. And specifically in the 210 course, Discovery Writing 210, we are asking them to follow APA documentation style. That's why you see it so specifically there. The essay uses sources, accurately citing sources with APA documentation style with few errors. And that alone just took a lot of time debating, well, wait, are we going to use APA style or MLA style? What do we mean by few? what do we mean by using sources accurately? All of those words carry, a lot of significance. And so if we follow that line across, we see that what we mean by highly proficient ranges down to not at all proficient. Back to the, what words are you going to use to tell a student they're doing the right thing or not the right thing? And you'll notice that there are values in there, 3 for highly proficient, 2 for proficient, 1 for somewhat proficient, and 0 for not at all proficient. And if you look at the language, basically when you're doing this, you're sort of copying and pasting it from one section to the next, but removing pieces as you go. And that's literally how I sometimes develop these rubrics. I copy it, I write the full description in the first box, and then start removing pieces as I move down to the end. And that's kind of the tip I would give you if you're creating rubrics. Get it right in the first box, and then the following boxes are just diminishing what you have in that first box. But again, get it right in the first box. That's the challenge.
Yeah.
Any comments about that? We'll just look at that first row right now. The first row, use of sources. Any comments about that? Okay, so now then the other criteria, actually kind of model what you were talking about earlier in our session, the format. That again, we labored over some of the wording there. Meaning we wanted to get organization into that one, but we also wanted to get, are they following some of the technical aspects? Like, are they using MS Word? That's kind of an obvious thing. If they got that far, they're obviously using MS Word. So you might even question that one. But we did labor over what we mean by format. Usage, oh my gosh, I should reveal myself to be, I'm a grammar nerd. I love grammar and I love language, and that's what I teach. So I like to quantify things. So in my own classes for usage, I'll say there are no errors, period. No errors, 0 errors, which, by the way, is getting a lot easier to do now with Grammarly and ChatGPTs and all that. So, not to mention, we always had MS Word with its little wavy, squiggly, blue lines. And so I was very rigid in my highly proficient category. But when I was meeting with other people, they said, let's be a little more generous in that. Let's say few to no errors. Let's not make it 0 errors. Let's make it few to no errors. And that's the grammar category. And in my own usage, I have 0. And then in my proficient category, I say 1 to 5. I'm actually counting it up. And I go very numerically down the row. So I kind of took some issue with saying words like some, too vague, or several, again, too vague, a lot. Look, I want numbers there. But I ceded to my colleagues and said, okay, we'll use few to no, some, several, a lot, or whatever it says. And that's usage. Now, let's look at reading. Anybody have any comments about that one? Okay, reading ability.
I have a comment. When I like quantifying as well, because then students know. And I think you can anticipate, well, I don't know if this is really real, but in my own imaginary world, I think you can kind of imagine how many mistakes a reader can tolerate per page, right? So if I say that highly proficient means that you have no more than 2 errors per page, then that's quantifiable. I can do that. It's easy for the students to understand.
Yeah. No, I'm sitting there tallying up things. I'm keeping, but what I didn't point out here also, we've had a lot of discussions about which language are we using, standard written English, and what do we mean by that? So I can't think of how long we spend, and we're still spending time talking about what do we mean by an error, how do we define error, and what is an error, and style, and all that. So much in that one. All right, the next category we called reading ability, comprehension of the readings. And the next, and look at the one following that, synthesis. I like to, it's very important to try to distinguish in when you're creating a rubric so that the terms aren't overlapping, because if they overlap, you're going to get, it's going to be hard to rate things. So reading ability is supposed to refer to, did they understand what they were reading, and how you're going to measure that. And then synthesis is more about what are they actually saying. So this took a while to separate some of that, but we're back to, having these really valuable discussions with your colleagues about what are your criteria? What do you mean by that? All right, I'm going to move on to the next one because there's quite a few, but this is, one of many, many, many rubrics for essay. And same thing now, discussion board. Again, we could spend a lot of time on this one, and I'm just curious, you could probably read through this one yourself since you said you have many discussion board rubrics. How does this compare to yours? What I put, this is the one I do use in mine. Involvement, meaning they're responding to 3 or more. Promptness, I want them to respond early in the week. Relevance and expression, that's, are they, giving full details? And I always throw in a usage and mechanics category, that's the grammar. How does this compare to the rubrics you have for, I think, William, you said you have a lot of rubrics for discussion boards, right?
Yeah, well, they tend to, okay, so some of the rubric categories are like timeliness, like, did you comment early in the week, and did you give meaningful feedback to 2 other students by the end of the week, so that's not as focused on content, because there's always that side. One of the rubric categories that we tend to use is sort of image-based language.
Oh.
And that is like, is something concrete, specific, and imaginative.
Oh, that's
well, because again, if you're writing for something that needs to communicate like a specific thing that is going to happen, whether that's on screen or in code or something. You mentioned like how do you handle in a rubric pushing back against vagueness, right? Because a vague idea won't translate into a visual production.
Good.
Right? So that's something that we tend to put into some of our rubrics, even for the discussion groups, because we want students thinking visually. So we tend to use a category on something like timeliness, just like timeliness, etiquette, and civility. And then, is there like, could you illustrate that idea? Those are like 3 categories we've used in the past. There are other categories too, but those are the ones that tend to stick in my mind because they're kind of unique into our discipline.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's very good. And I hadn't thought of netiquette. Had not thought of that one.
Yeah, because, in the same way that we were saying, like, the English language is always changing. Yeah. So is online etiquette.
Etiquette. I got to think about that one.
And like the quality of interaction is really difficult to quantify. That's right? How do you know if someone is genuinely commenting on another student's posting, as opposed to just like, I need to get in 50 words of a response posting by midnight on Wednesday, right? So, that's a tricky part to build into a rubric. I don't know if we've gotten there yet, but at least we're thinking about it.
Okay, well, that's good. I do change this from time to time. All right, and now the final one is the PowerPoint rubric, which, to be quite honest, this is one I have actually used, but my courses aren't focused. The learning objective is not to create PowerPoints in my courses. My courses are about writing, so I don't really even give them lessons on PowerPoints, but I do want them to do PowerPoints as part of their research papers, because I feel like it helps with the questionability of, is it your own or did somebody give this one to you? The more they have to do with the research paper, the more I feel like it's their own work. So we can look at this one later, but informative, organized, visually interesting, that's only 3 categories. And To be quite honest, I'm not thrilled with this PowerPoint rubric, and I'll show you why very, very soon as we do the analysis. But just to go over it, informative, it should have details about the topic, organized, it should be organized, and visually interesting. And for that one is where I kind of talk about a little bit about too much information on a slide or not enough, or where the image is coming from. So there you see my own rubrics. Any comments about the PowerPoint rubric? Okay, let me move on. All right, so now we're into what happens when you try to analyze rubrics from this EAC analysis thing. I don't know how many of you have tried this before. Back in the old days, maybe you weren't even there. There was on Blackboard, when you go into your grade center area, you would do a right click on your assignment, and it would say rubric analysis. And I used to do that very, very, routinely, just to see what, areas they were doing well in. And then it was about a year ago, and it wasn't there. And I panicked, and I went like, oh my God, what happened to the rubric analysis? What's going on in this school? But then it turns out I discovered it kind of last May. I think it was only last May that I saw that I think Ruth gave a webinar or something on it, and I followed it, and I saw it was just moved. So it was moved to the tools area. Again, every Blackboard area has this, and there is a screenshot here of where it is. So at the bottom of your course menu, not the course menu, the Blackboard institution page menu, there's the tools area. And when you click on that, you're going to see a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff there now. But there is something now called EAC Visual Data. And so what you would do is you would click on the EAC Visual Data, and then you're going to have to follow the next step, because if you don't, you're not going to find it at all. And you would change the date to an earlier date. Keep this in mind, because if you don't change the date to an earlier date, you're going to see 0. And then you select Go, then you select your rubric, then you select row analysis. Now, when this PowerPoint is over, I'm going to try to demonstrate what that looks like when you actually go in. But I just want to run through this so that you'll see what you're going to get when you follow these steps. Okay, ready? So this is what you're going to get. You're going to get something that looks like that. I did not design this myself. I did it like with 3 clicks, and something like this came out. For the very, this is for the very essay, the rubric that you saw before, the use of sources, the format, the usage, the reading ability, the synthesis. For a midterm exam that I gave to my students this semester, very recent, this happens pretty instantly. And you get a chart that looks like this. And what do we learn from this chart? You can see the colors, it's kind of color coded. So what would you call that color? Dark orange. That's the proficient category. The slightly paler orange is the competent category. The novice is that golden category, and the red is no evidence. There's actually still another category for, like really bad. I'll show you that when you get to see my other rubrics. But you get a very nice, this is why it's called visual data, because you kind of get to see which are the strong areas, which are the not so strong areas. And you see by midterm, they're doing okay. I mean, my students were doing okay. There was no evidence of anything, but you can still see that there are some categories like use of sources, obviously needs work. And it was midterm. So yeah, we do need some work in that. What I thought was really interesting was how high the usage category was. It's never been that high. Whenever I've done this, it was always the lowest one. And I'm thinking, okay, influence of whatever they're using, tools they're using. But I'm not going to complain. I'm just glad they're getting it right. The reading ability, again, we could question what do we mean by reading ability, but that still looks like another area where we need to work on. And the synthesis, that by that I meant, are they coming up with their original thinking, thoughts, theses, that sort of thing? Again, something to work on. So that's what you get. Let me share with you the discussion board rubric analysis. I'm laughing because the hardest part, you see a lot more not evidence in these. I don't know what my problem is or their problem is, but I wrote very clear directions on you must respond to 3 students in order to get full credit for involvement. I also wrote, please do this early in the week. I also wrote, please don't just say, that was great. But look again, usage and mechanics, really good. So I had a lot of late submissions this semester. Again, this is this semester. I had a lot of late submissions. I had a lot less interaction with one another. I'm starting to question, is this one of these a phenomenon as a result of the pandemic? I don't know. Really some interesting research questions to be thinking about. The lateness, I do allow them to submit papers late, to do these discussion boards postings, even though everything I write says early in the week. But you see, that's a huge problem, but I still leave it open. Now, the next any comments or questions? Alrighty. The next one is the PowerPoint analysis. Now, this is not from this semester because I usually have them do the PowerPoints at the end of the semester. And you see, this is like where everybody's above average. You remember that, I hope. But everybody did great on the PowerPoints at the end of the semester. Was I being the lazy one saying, yeah, you're doing great, let's just move on. But that use of, I guess my other rubric didn't show you use of sources. I wanted them to use sources in their PowerPoints at the end. This is from another class from spring semester. And you see how we're not learning anything from this rubric. Everybody just did great. And that's all, there's nothing to learn. So that's my example of perhaps not a great rubric. But what you're going to see, and Ruth can talk a lot more about this, is there's a lot of statistics that come out when you do the EAC analysis. Ruth, if you want to just kind of explain this slide to them, that would be great.
Sure. So in the EAC reporting, there is a menu on the side, and it really starts to call out different things. So what Helene has shown before is kind of this row by row analysis. But before you even get to the row by row analysis, how you scored all your students, we have this area called summary statistics. One of the key things in it is this KR20 Cronbach Alpha. It is a rubric reliability measurement. It looks at how you have scored every individual student on the entire rubric, and have you been jumping all over the place in scoring, inconsistently scoring across the students. If you were, that KR20 would be very low. It would be dropping down to 0.4, 0.5, 0.2 even. But the more consistent you are in looking at your higher scoring students tend to score more in the higher range, lower scoring students score in the lower range or mid range, the more consistently you are statistically scoring the student. That produces that KR20 value. And that really is built a little bit too on the standard deviation, the mean and the median. That is, again, in those views, students aren't all at the end or at the top or in the middle, but there's discrimination going on. So standard deviation for rubrics, it's in some ways, if your sample size is good, anything really above 30 is a good measurement, sample size. You might want that standard deviation to be closer to the 1 or a little more than the 1 than too far below. That is, you want that deviation breadth. And that's for the mean and the median. Notice that this is more in the middle, not again, everybody's scoring high or everybody's scoring low. So this is a guide. It's all contextual. It all depends on the rows and what you've done. So for instance, if I put in a row that says something like timeliness or formatting, and I really expect to give my students all very high marks in that, it's going to throw off your KR20 because it's going to say, wait a minute, you've been scoring other students really low, and now suddenly they're very high. That statistically is kind of going against the probability. So you have to, again, it's their guidance and they're contextually defined. You know what your rubric is doing and not doing. Does that make sense to people?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think we might still have time. I'll share, like we'll actually get into the EAC analysis once we're over with the PowerPoint. So you'll actually see some of this. It's pretty amazing. And again, it's all automatic. You don't have to sit there and figure this out on your own. All right, so here's my Cronbach alpha scores for the essays rubrics that I just shared with you. I just took the numbers. 0.97 for that essay, 1.08 for the discussion board, 0.81 for the PowerPoint, and the reliability is greater than 0.5 for high stakes. Any comments about that, Ruth? Anything you want to?
Well, again, I would hope that the essay one, that is a high stakes exam and or project that you're doing, and that's really good. That means, again, in terms of statistical probability, those higher scoring students are doing well, and you actually showed that in that graph. We had some at the lower end, middle end, and then this distribution across the rows. Discussion boards, those get to be tricky if you're using a standardized one week to week to week. You know in your head kind of what you're doing, but often the rows are very generic. They're not really drilling into what that post may be asking for. So we see those either very high, like this, or very low. And the PowerPoint one, again, it's telling you that, using those descriptors, you've been fairly consistent. Maybe there's a row that might be throwing things off, but overall, no, they're reliable rubrics in the sense you could look at the sample size and say, this is decent data.
Okay.
Be confident in it.
Well, that's giving me some more confidence in them. Thank you. All right, so, what do we learn from the rubric analysis? As I pointed out, the main thing is seeing areas of concern. Where do you want to give additional instruction? It's formative assessment. And, and I do, you might have an intuitive sense of this as you're doing it, but seeing it in the graph form really, really makes it clear that these are the weak area, the areas that you need to work on. On the other hand, it's also a good place to see where things are going well. Like I said, I was really surprised to see how the grammar category kind of shot up this semester. And I'm calling it improvement. I'm actually at the point of thinking, okay, if there are good tools out there for them to use, let them use it. But also the rubric is, kind of a way for me to look at, see, where do I go now? Like I was showing you before, okay, so they're not, I'm seeing that they're not replying in timely fashion to the discussion board thing. So more reminders, perhaps, or explaining to them the benefits of early feedback, all of that stuff. And now the areas of concern in the rubric to improve assessment, thinking about, are there categories that I haven't included? Like when William just mentioned before, netiquette. I hadn't even thought about including netiquette in the rubric. So there's like something that's missing there. And certainly those PowerPoints, I want to redo that, except again, that wouldn't be that wouldn't be formative assessment because I do it at the end of the semester. It's all over by then, but for the next semester gives me something else to think about the next time I teach the course. So how do we make our rubrics more effective? Hold on a second. We can reuse them across the sections and semesters to see trends and enhance data reliability by increasing sample size. I think we'll have time for me to get into my own area, and you'll see it's huge, so much data in there. But back to, what are we doing with that data? How do we analyze it? Looking at the trends in scoring, where are students performing well and where are they struggling? These are discussions that we have as part of in our general education program, looking at the overall analysis and saying, okay, how are we going to deal with perhaps they're not reading critically or they're not referring to sources accurately? And this is always an ongoing question, and looking at it over the trends over time. I really want to go back to my pre-pandemic discussion boards and look at the post-pandemic discussion boards and compare and see, was there a difference? I'm just curious. I'm just really curious to see if there is any effect. And now, of course, always going back to those criterion and levels of excellence in the descriptors and seeing, are we getting these into our assignments? And are they aligned with the learning objectives of the course and the program? And again, if you're in a program, conversation with your colleagues about the assignments that are going out and the assessments you're doing. And for the program now, are we doing in this course what's supposed to be done? Is the rubric measuring this enough? Is the assignment rigorous enough for what the program is asking the students to do? Let's just see. So if you're watching this in the future world, thank you for listening. I'm just gonna try to get into the EAC analysis, which I think in 5 minutes I could possibly show it to you. But if you have any questions afterwards, so feel free to email me. And I suppose, Ruth, you're also open for emails?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
all the statistical part is kind of, well, it may be new for all of us. Are there any questions so far? Asia, you still okay with what you've heard? Yes, and Tony, you too? You're still with us. And William, I know you're an old hand at all this. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this screen, the PowerPoint. With that, all right, I am now gonna go into that brave new world, and let's see if I can get into my hold on, hold on a second. I'm gonna exit the minimize view. I'm gonna share. Hold on. Why am I not? Oh, you know what I think I have to do? I think I have to hit escape. No, that's not doing it. End of slideshow. Click.
Are you getting a prompt?
Not yet.
Okay.
Okay, wait, no, I think I've got it now.
Got it.
I'm just gonna get into, okay, I'm gonna try to share my screen again. And I'm in Blackboard now. Okay, everybody can see my Blackboard institution page.
Yep.
Yes, okay, here we go. Into tools. Everybody see me going into tools. There's EAC visual data right there. Now, as I told you, do you remember what the tricky part here is? First of all, I have to click into EAC visual data. The tricky part is when you first go into this, it says, it gives you to like a date in November. Nothing's going to show up. Nothing. I tried this. Panic.
Well, only things that have been scored within that week. So one of the things to understand is that we purposely do it by default only 1 week back to prevent someone from pulling in something very large and slowing down their computer. So what you want to think about is the start date should be set to when you may have first started scoring a rubric, or in this case, a test. So you're in the test area over on the left menu. You might want to change that to rubrics, right? And then, yeah, go back a semester, go back a year, however far you want to do, but you will need to be in the rubrics area, Helene.
Okay, well, I thought, okay, because when I've done this in the past, I've just basically gone all the way back to like, some, again, let's do pre-pandemic times.
Yeah, that's
And-
fine.
And hold on, let's look, oh wow, it was a long time ago. Let's go back to, I'm just going to pick January 2019. Hold on, gotta double click on it, I think.
No, click on the January and click on 1. So
One.
you actually can change the date. You can also do that manually, but yes. So
Yep.
now you're looking at rubrics
Now
from
I'm
then
going
to
rubrics.
now. Click go.
And then I'm gonna hit go.
And what EAC is doing is looking at all of the courses that you teach and calling up all those different rubrics.
Okay.
And it's going to start with typically the most recent first. But what I tend to do is over on the left side under the rubric list name, see that little rubric in smaller print?
Mhm.
Click on it. It will alphabetize. Now you can start to see your rubrics more in an alphabetical order. And then you can select either the box next to one. And in this case, notice 65 of them came in. What that means is that is a rubric, standard rubric you have used over and over and over again in 65 different instances. And if you wanted to look at them all, yep, click on that little arrow, and it's now going to call them all in. And initially, what it does is it gives you the activity, the course, you as the instructor, the number of students enrolled, and then the number of students that were scored. So you can see 860 students scored on this over that time period. Which is just 73% of all that enrollment. But what might be more important is right up in the upper right-hand corner by the standard report. See that target? And it says 0.6 right now. So think of your target on a 0 to 1 scale or a 0 to 100%. Where is the minimum that you would say at this level or above is acceptable work? We default to 60, which would be a D, because traditionally that is passing. But that may be too low for you. Maybe you're looking like at a mid-C range, so a 0.75. Graduate courses, it could be a lot higher. But what happens now is if you look at the overall, you can see here that that's 606. So out of 860 students scored, 606 or 70% of them met that 75% target, which is the overall rubric score in a percentage. And that's good. That's more than half. That's not bad. But down below, again, this is where the 1.8, you've got a very reliable because you've consistently kind of scored your students on these rows. The other thing to look at is see how we have 4 rows in this rubric in this, and there's your breakout by row. And then by detail, if you click on details, this just breaks it out in a different way. Like here, 300 and those numbers next to the names of the columns, excellent, satisfactory, unsatisfactory, evident. Well, that 73% is built on how the distribution of those unique students under each of those columns. So again, against your target, 73, I mean, you might look for something that was lower. Is there a particular one? Nope. Even the promptness is at 73. But in the breakout of that, you can see you do have a lot of students that did not evident.
Yeah.
So goes back to your comment.
You know, I really feel like you could get lost in this. This is amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, you know, as I said, if I wanted to kind of compare pre to post pandemic discussion boards, you see these dates are from 2023.
Yes. So you would break out, here's my report for those pre-pandemic years, and then set the start date and do a report at the other end.
Yeah.
And you can use the standard report in Word to really give you those graphs to look at, or you could pop out. So one of the windows, so that little air in the blue bar there right below, you see that little, yep, click on that. And it may not show on your shared screen, but you have a separate little window.
I'm seeing it.
Yeah.
I'm seeing it, but I don't know if the shared screen will show that or any of the downloads. But as you see, you can download all of these reports. You can copy them, as I was doing, into the PowerPoints. And really, guys, you know, this would be something to share in your portfolios, your, you know, your evaluation portfolios. I'm not sure if, you know, how much, you know, data you want to include in portfolios, but these are pretty amazing. And as I was saying, you can really get lost in this and think about, you know, how you, let's see, how, when I want to get back, I keep forgetting how I get back.
The first tab in your browser that says
and I can't get to it because of the screen share.
I can see it. So right now you have the discussion board. Go back to the first tab of EAC.
This one.
Yep.
Here it is.
And change, you can select something else.
Yeah, I know I've learned like I can unselect those by doing that. And that anytime I've, you know, like any other rubric I want to get to, I can, you know, kind of find it up here. There was a certain. Anyway, I see at the end of the hour. I don't know if everybody needs to go, but I can stop sharing now. But before I stop sharing, is there anything you guys would like to see while I'm in the EAC thing? Any questions? I can't see. Let me see the chat area. I see there is a question from William.
I was really curious as to how, when you're collecting data and you have like a very small upper level class, right? We have like a senior seminar class that has like 6 students every 2 semesters. You have 6 students in your senior seminar class. We have some production classes that have 4 to 8 students. How do you handle very small sample sizes? And do you go across multiple years? Do you like collaborate with other institutions, like in a state system? You know, when you only have 12, when you have 18 students across 3 years in a class, how do you extrapolate the data?
Well, both of those methods. One would be multiple terms, multiple years. So this is the exiting seniors' performance on the project. Now this is the next year and the next year. You still may only have a total of 18 students, but you have that 3-year look to see if you see any trends among those for your curriculum. The other would then be to take your rubric and see if any other program is sharing their data publicly, or to contact them and say, here's what we use. Do you do something similar? How are your students doing? But sample size for small, you kind of just have to build it across the year, but also watch what's happening with those 6 students. Yeah, and so forth.
All right, thank you.
Were there any other questions, Asia, Tony, you have any other questions about rubric building or EAC analysis or any of this?
No, this was great. Thank you.
Okay, well,
Thank you.
yeah, well, thank you. And again, feel free to email me, Ruth. I can tell you how I use in the classes. Ruth really knows the whole EAC. I'm still, like I said, we just got this,
Right.
I was just aware of this in May, that, EAC analysis came to us. And then, I'm like, wow, just to have the time to, do the kinds of analysis that you'd like to do. Like I said, I have a lot of research questions in my head, like pre-post, what about the essays? What about one semester to the next semester? Or here's another one, comparing students in the earlier levels of writing, like foundations writing, to the more advanced levels. What are the changes over time? So many interesting questions. And you saw how quickly you're able to get some of these answers. It's really a powerful tool.
Yeah.
So with that, I'll close and say thank you for your participation. Really appreciated all your input. Thank you so much, Ruth, for your expertise.
No problem. Glad to help.
Yeah, and anybody who's watching in the future, again, we're available through our emails and so forth. So thanks much. I'm just gonna say we're done.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks
Bye.
again. Bye.
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 Good.
I think that went well.
Yeah.
I wish, like I said, I wish I understood more of the math of the statistics behind it. I never heard of the Cronbach thing before, standard deviation. Yeah, but I never, thought of even, considering those things in terms of doing the rubrics. But yeah.
Well, Rebecca has a cheat sheet too, sort of all the terminology. And I think David does as well. It might be time to distribute that to you and to the others on the on this as well.
Yeah, I think
helps.
More of this would be helpful.
Yes.
And and certainly guiding people through the EAC. I don't know who else is using EAC analysis at all. Like I said, it was still a new thing in May. William, by the way, he's been on, a lot of this stuff, staying on top of it. So
Okay.
as far as other faculty, I don't know, I haven't heard from anybody else.
Right. Our next session will talk about using this with the portfolio, the faculty portfolio. So I think that will be good, and we'll refer back to this because it all starts with the basics.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, well, I gotta get on to my next meeting.
Me too. Thank you, Helene.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye.
Bye-bye.